Welcome to the deep dive. Forget pulling rabbits out of hats. Today we're plunging into a far more profound kind of illusion. We're talking about the age-old question, pondered by thinkers across the globe. Is what we perceive as reality the ultimate truth, or is there maybe something deeper going on?
It's really fascinating how this tension between, well, appearance and reality isn't just confined to one corner of the world. You see diverse philosophical, spiritual systems grappling with very similar ideas.
Right.
We'll be using the Hindu concept of Māyā as a kind of springboard.
Yeah.
While it originates in India, it provides a really useful lens, I think, to explore this broader theme of illusion.
Exactly. Think of Maya as that nagging feeling that maybe what we see isn't the whole story, or at least not exactly as it appears. So our mission today is to explore how different traditions, Advaita Vedanta, Mahayana Buddhism, specifically the Madhyamaka and Yogacara schools, Taoism, Platonism, and Gnosticism, how they all tackle this fundamental question.
Yeah, questions like, are we living in a fundamentally unreal world? Is it more like a dream?
Or are we just misinterpreting what's right in front of us? Or maybe our everyday reality is just one layer of something far more complex.
And to guide us, we'll be looking at insights from some key figures. People like Shankara, Nagarjuna, Zhuangzi, Plato, and also some really interesting modern interpreters like Ramana Maharshi and Alan Watts.
They offer such distinct perspectives on this, don't they?
They really do. We'll be asking, what is the nature of this illusion according to each tradition? And importantly, what paths do they suggest for, well, seeing beyond it?
It's going to be really interesting to compare these ideas, not just with each other, but also, contrasting them with the dominant Western scientific materialist view.
Definitely. Okay, shall we dive in with Advaita Vedanta first?
Let's do it. So Advaita Vedanta, championed by Adi Shankara, it hits us with a pretty mind-bending idea right off the bat. The ultimate oneness of everything.
Right.
Your individual self, Atman, is fundamentally identical to the absolute reality, Brahman. So, okay, where does this world seemingly separate objects and individuals come from then?
And that's precisely where Māyā enters the picture. What's fascinating here is that Māyā isn't just some, cheap trick.
Right.
In Advaita, it's understood in two main ways. It's both the creative power of Brahman, the very energy that brings the universe into appearance, and it's also the principle that obscures Brahman's true nature, making it seem like there's a world teeming with distinct entities.
Okay.
But Brahman itself, it's described as Satchitananda, pure existence, consciousness, and bliss. And also as nirgun, meaning without qualities, at least in the way we usually think of qualities.
So it's beyond our usual concepts.
Exactly. The key insight here, I think, is that our everyday experiences aren't false exactly, but their reality is sort of secondary. It's dependent on the underlying unchanging truth of Brahman.
Okay. Recognizing that dependence is the shift.
It's a crucial shift in perspective, yes.
Right. So if Atman and Brahman are one, why do we experience ourselves as separate individuals, these jivas, living our own lives?
Well, that apparent separation, according to Advaita, is part of the illusion created by Māyā.
Okay.
And Māyā, as I mentioned, has these two roles. It's the power behind the appearance of the world, and it's also the veil that stops us seeing the underlying unity.
The veil. Okay.
Exactly. And this leads us to the concept of mithya. The world as we perceive it is mithya.
Mithya. Now, that gets translated as illusion or unreal, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying it's more nuanced than that.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's vital to understand that it doesn't mean utterly non-existent, like a flower growing in empty space, a sci flower.
Okay.
We interact with the world, we experience it. It has empirical validity, We stub our toes on it.
Right. It feels real enough.
But its reality isn't absolute in the same fundamental way that Brahman is. Its reality is contingent. And ultimately, it can be, sublated understood for what it truly is when we attain self-knowledge.
Like waking up from a dream.
That's a common analogy they use. While dreaming, everything feels completely real, but upon waking, you realize its nature was different all along.
So it's more like an apparent transformation of Brahman, this idea of vivarta, rather than a genuine change in its essence.
Precisely. It's like mistaking a rope in dim light for a snake.
The classic example.
Yeah, the snake seems real, it might even frighten you, but it doesn't actually change the rope one bit.
And this is captured in that key verse, isn't it? Brahma satyam jagan mithya.
Juvo Brahmavanapara.
Yes.
Brahman is the truth. The world is mithya. The jiva is Brahman indeed, not different.
Okay, so if the world's not ultimately real in that absolute sense, What's causing us to perceive it that way? What keeps the illusion going?
That brings us to avidya, ignorance. But again, it's not just a simple lack of information.
Right.
In Advaita, it's considered a kind of positive, beginningless principle that actively obscures the true nature of reality. It's the root cause of our feeling separate from Brahman and believing this pluralistic world is the final reality.
But it can be removed.
Yes. Crucially, it's described as jnana nivarkya, removable by knowledge.
And this ignorance, avidya, operates through atisa, superimposition.
Exactly. That's the mechanism. We mistakenly attribute qualities of the non-self, like our bodies, our minds, the external world, onto the true self, the Atman.
Like saying, I am tall or I am happy.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I am tall superimposes a quality of the body onto the self, which is pure consciousness, beyond such attributes.
Got it.
And avidya has these two powers, avroha shakti, the power of concealment, which hides the true nature of reality, like the dim light hiding the rope.
Okay.
And vikapa shakti, the power of projection, which throws up the false appearance that this snake or the world of apparently separate things.
So back to the snake and the rope analogy. Gaudapada really used that effectively, didn't he?
He did. It's such a useful way to understand it. So just to recap the symbolism, the rope is Brahman or Atman, the underlying reality.
Right.
The snake is the world, the ego, the illusion that appears real. The dim light is avidya, the ignorance allowing the misperception. And the light, true illumination, that's jhana, knowledge, which reveals the rope for what it is, making the snake vanish.
Vanish.
Yeah.
Not meaning it was never there in experience, but its perceived reality dissolves.
Exactly. What's so insightful about this is, one, the illusion doesn't affect the underlying reality. The snake doesn't change the rope.
Okay.
Two, the illusion feels completely real while the ignorance persists.
Yeah.
Three, the illusion needs a real basis. You don't see a snake in thin air. There has to be the rope.
A substratum.
Yes. Four, knowledge doesn't create the rope. It just reveals what was always there. And five, liberation, therefore, is simply removing that ignorance.
It's a really powerful image, but as the source points out, it has limitations, doesn't it? Like, where does the memory of a snake come from if avidya is beginningless?
Right, that's a fair question. We usually need prior experience to make such a mistake.
And who exactly is deluded if Brahman itself is unchanging and one?
Those are important nuances, definitely. Advaitins have offered various explanations, sometimes suggesting it's like a dream arising within Brahman or trying to pinpoint the locus of ignorance. But analogies are just pointers, ultimately. They guide us towards something that kind of transcends our everyday logic.
Okay, so let's bring this into more modern context. Ramana Maharshi.
Yes, Ramana Maharshi, a 20th century sage who really embodied and taught Advaita principles through direct experience.
And he was very much aligned with Shankara on monism and Māyā.
Very much so. He viewed Māyā as that power obscuring the self, creating the illusion of a separate soul, world, and even a personal God. But he also stressed that the world isn't unreal in the sense of being distinct from the self. Rather, it's real as the self.
Okay, so its reality isn't independent, it's grounded in the self.
Precisely. Its reality is intrinsic to the self, not separate from it.
And his main method for cutting through this Māyā was atmavichara, self-inquiry.
Yes, relentless self-inquiry, persistently asking, who am I, koem, and using that process of neti, not this, not this.
So negating all the things you identify with but aren't truly the body, the mind, thoughts, feelings.
To eventually arrive at the irreducible awareness that is the true self.
It sounds like a direct assault on the ego, the ahamavedi, or I thought.
That's exactly it. Ramana considered the ego, this I thought, the very root of Māyā. By constantly questioning its reality, tracing it back to its source, it eventually dissolves. Like the snake disappearing when you see the rope clearly.
He even said the mind is Māyā.
He did. He saw the mind, this stream of thoughts centered around the I, as the very fabric of illusion.
But he also recognized that most people need some preparation for this kind of intense inquiry.
Oh, absolutely. While his own realization was spontaneous, he acknowledged that for most, practices like devotion, meditation, ethical conduct, these are crucial for quieting the mind enough to make self-inquiry effective.
And the Guru's grace.
That too. He often emphasized the importance of the Guru's presence and grace in facilitating the process. And, much like traditional Advaita, he frequently used the dream analogy.
Comparing waking and dreaming.
Yes. Just as dream objects seem perfectly real within the dream but are understood as mental creations upon waking, the waking world, while real on its conventional level, is ultimately an appearance from the standpoint of the self.
Fascinating. And what about free will versus predetermination? That's always a big question.
Ramana had a really interesting take. He often suggested that the body's actions, what happens in the world, are largely predetermined by karma, or divine will.
So no free will there.
Not in terms of controlling external events or the body's actions. However, he stressed that true freedom lies in realizing your identity as the self.
The non-doer.
Exactly. The self doesn't act. It simply is. By identifying with the self, you remain untouched by actions and their consequences. This fundamentally challenges the ego's sense of agency, which is, so central to the whole illusion of Māyā.
Wow. Okay, so Advaita paints this powerful picture. A single underlying reality, Brahmanatman, obscured by ignorance, avidya or Māyā, and the path out is direct knowledge, jhana, of our true identity.
That's a good summary, yes.
Right. Now let's make quite a significant shift and explore the Buddhist perspectives, which, as you mentioned, take a very different approach.
It's quite a pivot, yes. Buddhist philosophy is also deeply concerned with illusion, but its framework is distinct. Unlike Advaita's idea of a substantial ultimate reality, like Brahman, Buddhism often emphasizes emptiness, or the fundamental role of consciousness. Let's start with the Madhyamaka school and Nagarjuna's really profound concept of sunyata, emptiness.
Emptiness. Okay, that sounds, well, a bit bleak.
Yeah.
Realistic, maybe.
That's a really common first reaction.
Yeah.
But in Madhyamaka, shunyata isn't about absolute nothingness or a void. Not at all.
Okay.
Instead, it refers to the absence of svabhava.
Svabhava.
Yes, svabhava. It means something like inherent existence or self-essence, or an independent, unchanging core within all phenomena, all dharmas.
So things don't have their own built-in reality.
Exactly. Nagarjuna argued very rigorously that nothing possesses this kind of independent, self-sufficient reality. Things are empty because they lack this ultimate self-sustaining essence. The radical insight here is that nothing has a fixed, independent identity locked inside it. And this lack of inherent existence isn't a negative void. It's actually the very condition that allows for change, for interaction, for interconnectedness.
Wait, how does lacking something allow for change? That seems counterintuitive.
Think about it. If something possessed a fixed, unchanging, inherent essence, svabhava, it would be stuck being exactly what it is forever. It couldn't become anything else, couldn't interact in a meaningful way.
Ah, I see. Because it would be totally self-contained and immutable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's because things lack svabhava that they can arise, change, affect each other, and cease. Nagarjuna systematically deconstructs the idea of svabhava using logic, often showing how assuming inherent existence leads to absurd conclusions.
Like with causality.
Yeah, his analysis of causality is famous. He examines different ways a cause could relate to an effect if they had inherent existence. Are they identical? Totally different. And shows how none of those options really work logically.
So he's dismantling our basic assumptions about how things exist and relate to each other. And emptiness itself is empty. Shunyata shunyata. That sounds like tying yourself in knots.
It does sound paradoxical, but what it means is that even emptiness isn't some ultimate thing or independent reality in itself. It's not a substance or a ground like Brahman.
Okay.
It's simply the nature of phenomena that are dependently arisen. And that's the crucial link. Emptiness is deeply, inextricably tied to the core Buddhist teaching of Kracitya Samutpada, dependent origination.
Dependent origination, the idea that everything arises and exists only in dependence on causes and conditions.
Exactly. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is part of a vast web of interconnectedness.
Yeah.
As Nagarjuna famously stated, that which is dependently arisen we call emptiness.
Because if something arose dependently, it can't have its own independent, inherent existence.
You got it. If it had svabhav, it wouldn't need to depend on anything else for its being.
Okay, so understanding dependent origination is the key to understanding emptiness. And this understanding is the middle way.
Yes, the middle way between the extremes of eternalism, believing things have permanent independent existence, and nihilism, believing things utterly cease to exist or that actions have no consequences. Emptiness avoids both pitfalls.
Right. Now, the source also mentions the doctrine of the two truths. How does that work?
Ah, the two truths. Satyadvaya. This is really important in Madhyamaka. There's conventional truth, saviti satya, and ultimate truth, paramartha satya.
Conventional and ultimate.
Conventional truth is our everyday experience, how things appear and function in the world. It's based on language, concepts, and, yes, the mistaken assumption of svabhava, but it's necessary. We need it to communicate, to function, to even talk about the path.
So it's not just wrong.
Not entirely wrong, just not the ultimate picture. It's a valid way of operating within the world. Ultimate truth, on the other hand, is how things really are when analyzed deeply, empty of inherent existence. It's non-conceptual, beyond language, and realized directly through wisdom prajna.
And Nagarjuna even suggested that, from the ultimate view, there's no fixed truth to grasp.
Kind of, yeah. The ultimate truth is perhaps the lack of any ultimately graspable fixed truth or essence. It's a radical letting go of conceptual fixation.
So our everyday world isn't a complete fabrication. It's more that we fundamentally misunderstand its nature. We see inherent existence where there is none.
That's a great way to put it. And the two truths aren't like two separate boxes or realities. They're interdependent.
How so?
Well, you can't really teach or even talk about the ultimate truth without using conventional language and concepts. And you can't attain nirvana, liberation from suffering, without understanding the ultimate truth of emptiness.
Okay.
This leads to that seemingly paradoxical Māyā statement that samsara, the cycle of suffering, our conventional reality and nirvana are not ultimately different in their essential nature.
Whoa. How can that be?
Because the fundamental nature of both is emptiness. The difference lies in our perception, whether it's clouded by ignorance and clinging, which constitutes samsara, or illuminated by wisdom, nirvana.
So liberation isn't going somewhere else, it's seeing this reality correctly.
In essence, yes. It's a transformation of understanding, not necessarily a change of location.
This is definitely a different flavor than Advaita's substantial Brahman. Madhyamaka's illusion seems to be our projection of inherent existence onto dependently arisen phenomena.
That's a key takeaway. The illusion isn't a veil over something inherently real in that same way. It's our mistaken way of perceiving.
Okay. Now, what about the Yogacara school? The source mentions Asagga and Vasubandhu. How does their perspective differ?
Yogacara takes a related but distinct approach, shifting the focus squarely onto consciousness as the key to understanding both reality and illusion. Their core slogans are Siddhamatra, mind only, and Vijaptimatra, representation only, or perception only.
Mind only. Okay, that sounds, well, like idealism. Does it mean they think the external world doesn't actually exist, that it's all in our heads?
Ah, that is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's a huge point of scholarly debate. Yogacarans argue that what we perceive as an external world, seemingly separate from our minds, is actually a construction or projection within consciousness. Vijaptimatra emphasizes that our only access to reality is through these mental representations or perceptions.
So no direct access to anything outside the mind.
According to this view, no. Now, some interpretations take this as straightforward metaphysical idealism. Only mind is ultimately real. The external world lacks independent existence. They point to texts suggesting the world is created by mind, meditative experiences where external reality seems to dissolve.
Parallels with Western idealists like Berkeley, maybe?
Exactly. That comparison is often made. From this idealist standpoint, the key insight is that our experience is fundamentally mental in nature.
But the source mentioned non-idealist interpretations too.
Absolutely. Many scholars push back against a purely idealist reading. They argue Yogacara might be more focused on epistemology, how we know, or phenomenology, how experience appears to us.
So describing the structure of experience rather than denying an external world outright?
Possibly. Some suggest Vijaptimatra describes our ordinary deluded state, not ultimate reality. Others see it as a pedagogical tool, a skillful means to help practitioners detach from fixation on external objects.
A kind of therapeutic technique almost?
In a way, yes, to break our habitual realism. Still others argue Yogacara actively avoids fixed ontological claims, focusing instead on deconstructing cognitive habits. There's even talk of conventionalist idealism. Maybe experience is mentally constructed conventionally, but ultimate reality, tathata or suchness, remains beyond description.
So the jury's still out, basically.
Very much so. It's a rich and ongoing debate.
But regardless of the exact metaphysical position, they definitely highlight the mind's crucial role in shaping our perceived reality.
Undeniably. That's central. And, like Advaita, they also lean heavily on the dream analogy.
Right, Vasubandhu's Vimshiki is mentioned.
Yes. The argument is, just as in a dream, vivid, seemingly real experiences arise entirely within the mind with no actual external counterparts. Perhaps our waking experience shares this fundamental nature. It directly challenges our naive realism, that default assumption that perception mirrors an independent world perfectly.
Okay. But if it's all mind-generated, how do they explain continuity? Why do we experience a seemingly consistent world? And why do different people seem to experience the same world? That's a classic objection to idealism.
A very important one. And Yogacara addresses this with the concept of the alaya vijnana.
The storehouse consciousness.
Exactly. This is seen as the foundational layer of consciousness. It's a continuous stream that holds all the karmic seeds, latent impressions, or potentialities, bijas, from all our past actions and experiences.
Like a repository of karmic memory.
Sort of. These seeds mature over time and project forth our individual subjective experiences and the appearance of a common external world. It accounts for both personal continuity and intersubjective consistency, all within consciousness.
Wow, that's quite a system. And then there's the theory of the three natures. Chisavabhava, how does that fit in?
The three natures offer a way to analyze our experience and understand the path to liberation within this framework. There's the parikalpita svabhava, the imagined or constructed nature.
Okay.
This is our ordinary mistaken perception where we impose inherent existence and subject-object duality onto experience. It's the layer of illusion.
And
Then there's the paratantrasvabha, the dependent nature. This is the actual flow of consciousness itself, the stream arising from the alaya vijnana with its seeds. It's the basis upon which the illusion is constructed.
And the third.
The pranippana svabhava, the perfected or consummate nature. This is ultimate reality, the emptiness of that imagined duality, the absence of the subject-object split within the dependent flow. It's often equated with tathata, suchness, reality as it is when freed from conceptual construction.
So liberation in Yogacara involves seeing through the imagined nature, parikalpita, to understand the dependent nature, paratantra, and realize its ultimate perfected nature, parinibbana.
That's the core idea, yes. It's about transforming consciousness itself.
Okay, so the Buddhist perspectives, both Madhyamaka and Yogacara, offer really distinct ways into this question of illusion. Madhyamaka focusing on the illusion of inherent existence. Yogacara on consciousness constructing experience, both pointing towards wisdom, praja, as the way through.
Well summarized. They provide powerful, though different, critiques of our ordinary understanding.
Right. Now, let's turn our attention eastward again to China and look at Taoism.
Taoism.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that while Taoism doesn't have a single term quite like Māyā, it definitely explores illusion, but often through the lens of relative perception, the limits of language, and the gap between our concepts and the Tao itself.
The fundamental underlying principle.
Yes, the ineffable way or principle that underlies and flows through everything. And Zhuangzi's famous butterfly dream is just a perfect classic illustration of the Taoist approach to these questions.
Oh, the butterfly dream. I love that story. Zhuangzi dreams he's a butterfly.
Fluttering about, happy, completely unaware of being Zhuangzi.
Right. Just totally being a butterfly. Then he wakes up and boom, he's Zhuangzi again. And he's left with this question. Was I Zhuangzi dreaming I was a butterfly, or am I now a butterfly dreaming I'm Zhuangzi?
Exactly. It sounds whimsical, maybe, but it packs a real philosophical punch.
What's the core takeaway then?
Well, at its most basic level, it radically challenges the certainty of our personal identity and the clear line we usually draw between dream states and waking reality.
If the butterfly experience felt just as real, how can we be absolutely sure about this working state?
Precisely. It introduces a kind of epistemological skepticism. How reliable is our subjective experience, really? But it goes deeper than just doubt.
The source mentions uha, the transformation of things.
Yes. Zhuangzi uses this term himself. It highlights the constant flux and transformation inherent in the universe, including our own identities and states of consciousness. Everything is always changing, transforming. The line between Zhuangzi and butterfly becomes blurred in this flow.
So maybe it's not about figuring out which is real, but about accepting the transformation.
That's a big part of it. Some interpretations also see it as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. Just as you awaken from a dream to waking reality, maybe you can awaken from ordinary, limited consciousness to a broader Taoist understanding.
And seeing Zhuangzi and the butterfly as just different manifestations of the Tao, interconnected.
Yes, seeing beyond the fixed distinctions. Guozhang, a famous commentator, really emphasized this non-dual aspect. It also critiques the idea of a fixed, unchanging self. The source mentions contrasting the formed mind, Chenkan, with a constant mind. The formed mind being rigid, biased. Exactly. Attached to its fixed ideas and identity. The ideal constant mind is more like a clear mirror fluid, spontaneous, reflecting reality without clinging or judgment, like the butterfly.
It's interesting to compare this with Descartes' dream argument, isn't it? Both use dreams to question reality.
But with very different aims, right?
Yeah.
Descartes was using doubt methodically, trying to find an absolutely certain foundation for knowledge. The cogito, I think, therefore I am. Zhuangzi seems less interested in finding certainty and more interested in embracing ambiguity, illustrating Taoist themes like transformation, non-duality, and the limitations of our fixed categories. He's using the paradox to open us up, not nail something down.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the Tao Te Ching, Laozi? The source links this to the limits of language.
Yes, the Tao Te Ching really foregrounds the problem of language and concepts. That famous opening line sets the tone.
The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name.
Exactly. It immediately tells you the ultimate reality, the Tao, is fundamentally ineffable beyond words and names.
So, language itself creates a kind of illusion.
In a way, yes. Naming, categorizing, conceptualizing these activities create the perceived world of distinct things, which is necessary for us to function. But the Taoist insight is that this process inherently limits our perception. It carves up the seamless reality of the Tao and obscures its underlying unity.
And mistaking those names and concepts for the ultimate reality is the illusion.
That's a key part of the Taoist view of illusion. We get trapped in our conceptual boxes.
And the source also connects perception to desire, quoting the Tao Te Ching again.
Right. Let there always be non-being or desirelessness, so we may see their subtlety or mystery. And let there always be being or desire, so we may see their outcome or manifestations.
What's the idea there?
The idea is that when our minds are clouded by strong desires, attachments, and fixed ideas, we tend to only see the surface level, the named things, the outcomes, the manifestations. But when the mind is calm, clear, desireless, in a state of non-being, in that sense we become more open, more receptive to perceiving the subtle underlying mystery, the nameless source, the Tao itself. Desire clouds the mirror.
So Taoism aims to move beyond dualistic thinking. Like that example, when people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly.
Exactly. Opposites like beautifully wiggly, good, bad, high-low, they arise together, are interdependent and ultimately emerge from the same source, the Tao. True understanding means seeing beyond these dichotomies, recognizing the underlying unity.
And this understanding is more intuitive, experiential than purely intellectual.
Very much so. The Taoist path emphasizes experiencing the Tao, aligning with its flow through practices like wu-wei effortless action, acting spontaneously and naturally, and cultivating a state of not knowing, being open rather than rigidly certain.
So the Taoist illusion is fundamentally about mistaking our limited human constructs, our language, concepts, dualistic judgments for the boundless flowing reality of the Tao. And this leads to feeling separate and suffering.
That captures it well, yes. It's about getting stuck in the map and forgetting the territory.
Okay. Fascinating how different traditions approach this. Now let's swing back westward again. Are there parallels to Māyā or these ideas of illusion in Western philosophy? The source points to Plato and Gnosticism.
Yes, it's really interesting to see how similar themes surface, albeit in very different philosophical contexts. Plato's allegory of the cave is probably the most famous Western image exploring appearance versus reality.
Right, from the Republic, the prisoners chained up, only seeing shadows on the wall.
Which they mistake for the only reality there is. It's such a powerful metaphor.
So what does it all symbolize for Plato?
Well, the dark cave represents the world of sensory experience, the everyday world we perceive through sight, sound, touch.
Okay.
The flickering shadows on the wall or the specific, imperfect, changing objects we encounter in this sensory world. And the prisoners. That's us, ordinary people, trapped by our senses and taking these fleeting appearances as the ultimate truth. We're stuck in doxa, mere opinion or belief.
And the escape, the prisoner who gets free and goes outside.
That symbolizes the difficult journey of philosophical education, turning away from the deceptive sensory world towards the intelligible realm, the realm of true knowledge, episteme.
And outside the cave.
The world outside, bathed in sunlight, represents the realm of the forms, the perfect, eternal, unchanging archetypes of things like justice, beauty, equality, and ultimately goodness.
The forms, that's central to Plato.
Absolutely. And the sun itself, the source of light making everything visible outside the cave, symbolizes the form of the good, the highest form, the ultimate source of all reality, truth, and intelligibility. The key insight is that our sensory world is just a pale, flickering imitation of this higher, truer reality.
So for Plato, the physical world we sense is like those shadows, an imperfect copy, constantly changing, less real than the eternal forms.
Exactly. True knowledge, episteme, isn't about observing physical objects. It's about grasping these eternal forms through reason and intellectual contemplation.
So the sensory world is illusory in the sense of being secondary, derivative, and misleading if taken as the final word.
Precisely. Liberation, for Plato, involves this intellectual ascent, turning the soul's eye away from the shadows towards the forms, especially the form of the good. It's a rational, philosophical journey.
Okay. A very different path than, say, Abhamavichara or Taoist Wu Wei. Now, what about Gnosticism? The source says it wasn't one single system.
That's right. Gnosticism refers to a whole range of diverse religious and philosophical movements, mainly prominent in the early centuries CE. But they often shared some core themes about reality, illusion, and liberation.
And a key theme was dualism.
Often, yes, a
Yeah.
radical dualism. They typically posited a sharp contrast between a supreme, transcendent, absolutely good God dwelling in a spiritual realm called the pleroma, the fullness,
Okay.
and the material cosmos, our physical universe, which they generally viewed as flawed, deficient, even evil.
Flawed. How so? Created by the supreme God.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Many Gnostic systems introduced a figure called the demiurge.
The demiurge.
Yes, a kind of craftsman or creator figure responsible for making the material world. But crucially, this demiurge was seen as distinct from and inferior to the true supreme God, often depicted as ignorant, arrogant, sometimes even malevolent.
So the creator of our world wasn't the ultimate God.
In many Gnostic views, no. And because the creator was flawed, the material world is inherently flawed too. It's seen as a trap, a prison, a realm of darkness and illusion, designed, intentionally or not, to keep spiritual beings entangled.
So the material world itself is the illusion, in a way, or at least a realm of illusion.
Yes, fundamentally.
Uh,
For many Gnostics, the material world is the great deception. And trapped within this flawed material world, specifically within certain human beings, are divine sparks pneuma, fragments of the true, higher God that have fallen and become imprisoned in material bodies.
like little pieces of light trapped in darkness.
That's a common Gnostic image, yes. But most humans live in a state of ignoral ignorance. They're unaware of their true divine origin, unaware of the true God, and unaware of the flawed nature of the cosmos and its creator. This ignorance is often seen as being perpetuated by the demiurge and his cosmic rulers, the archons.
So how do you get free from this cosmic prison, this illusion?
Through gnosis. Yes, but not just ordinary intellectual knowledge. Gnosis means direct, intuitive, experiential knowledge, a kind of revelatory insight.
What does this gnosis reveal?
It involves recognizing one's own true divine identity as the spark of the pleroma, understanding the illusory and trapping nature of the material world and the ignorance of its creator, and crucially, learning the secret knowledge or path needed to escape the cycles of reincarnation in this flawed cosmos and ascend back to the spiritual realm, the pleroma, reuniting with the true God.
Wow. So liberation is literally escaping the material world.
In many Gnostic systems, yes, it's a path of ascent and escape. So, while both Plato and the Gnostics see our ordinary world as less real or flawed compared to a higher reality, their diagnoses and prescriptions are quite different. Plato emphasizes reason and contemplating eternal forms within an ordered cosmos, while Gnosticism often sees the cosmos itself as a mistake to be escaped through secret revealed knowledge.
It really is remarkable the different ways this theme of illusion plays out. Okay, let's try to pull some threads together now with a comparative analysis.
Absolutely. What strikes me most, looking across these traditions, is just how varied the meaning of illusion really is.
Right. It's not one single concept.
Not at all. For Advaita, it's Māyā ontologically dependent, ultimately sublatable, an apparent superimposition.
Okay.
For Madhyamaka Buddhism, the illusion is primarily the mistaken belief in svabhava, inherent existence.
Right, the conceptual error.
For Yogacara, it's more about perceiving supposedly independent external objects, when experience is representation only.
The mind's construction.
For Taoism, it's mistaking our limited human concepts and language for the dynamic, ineffable Tao.
Getting stuck in the names.
For Plato, it's mistaking the changing sensory world for the true reality of the eternal forms.
The shadows for the substance.
And for Gnosticism, it's often the material world itself, seen as a flawed creation, a realm of darkness ruled by an ignorant demiurge.
And the reality that's being obscured is just as diverse, isn't it? Brahman, emptiness, mind itself, the Tao, the forms, the pleroma.
Exactly. Everyone seems to agree that ordinary perception is somehow mistaken or incomplete, but what it's mistaken about and what the underlying truth is varies enormously.
And ignorance plays a key role everywhere, but its nature differs too.
Avidya in Advaita is this positive, beginningless, obscuring power causing superimposition.
Okay.
In Buddhism, avidya is more about misunderstanding reality, clinging to a non-existent self, grasping at inherent existence, not seeing dependent origination or the nature of consciousness.
Right.
In Taoism, ignorance looks like conceptual rigidity, being out of touch with the natural flow, relying on intellect over intuition. For Plato, ignorance is being stuck in the cave, limited to sensory opinion, doxa, lacking philosophical understanding, episteme.
Caught in the shadows.
And in Gnosticism, agnoia is that profound ignorance of the true God, one's divine spark, and the flawed nature of the cosmos.
And these different diagnoses of ignorance directly shape the proposed remedies, the paths to liberation we're about to discuss.
Precisely. The way you define the problem dictates the solution you propose. That comparative table in the source material is super helpful here, laying out the key terms, meaning of illusion, role of ignorance, figures, metaphors, and paths side by side.
Yeah, it really crystallizes the similarities and the stark differences. You see this universal human grappling with appearance versus reality, but the frameworks developed are so culturally and philosophically specific.
Absolutely. It underscores the depth and diversity of human thought on these ultimate questions. Okay, so let's look at those paths now. How do these traditions propose we actually respond to Māyā, or its equivalents? How do we awaken?
Right. If we're caught in some kind of illusion, what's the way out? The source groups, the method's emphasis on knowledge, wisdom, ethical discipline, and mental cultivation.
Yes, and the specific blend and emphasis varies greatly. Let's start with knowledge or wisdom. In Advaita Vedanta, jhana is paramount.
Direct knowledge of Atman equals Brahman.
Exactly. And the traditional path involves shravan, hearing, studying scripture with a guru, manana, reflection, intellectual understanding, and nidikisana, deep, sustained meditation or contemplation.
And Ramana Maharshi's emphasis on atmavichara, self-inquiry.
Yes, as a very direct path to that same jnana.
Okay. And in Buddhism?
The key is cultivating praja wisdom or insight. In Madhyamaka, this means insight into emptiness, shunyata, and dependent origination, often through logical analysis and meditation. In Yogacara, it's insight into the nature of consciousness, Vijnanaptimatra, the three natures, again through study, reflection, and meditation, aimed at transforming perception.
And Gnosticism emphasized gnosis.
Right, that direct, intuitive, often revelatory knowing. Less about philosophical reasoning, perhaps, and more about receiving hidden teachings or having mystical experiences that unveiled the truth about God, the self, and the cosmos.
Okay. What about ethics and mental discipline? They seem foundational almost everywhere.
They really are, often seen as essential preparation, purifying the mind and creating the stability needed for insight to arise. In Advaita, you have the sadhanakatuya, the fourfold qualifications.
Discrimination, detachment, the 6 virtues like mind sense control, and the longing for liberation.
Exactly. Prerequisites for effective inquiry. In Buddhism, the Noble Eightfold Path is central, integrating ethical conduct, right, speech, action, livelihood, mental discipline, right, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, right, understanding thought.
They all work together.
Yes. Taoism stresses virtues like humility, simplicity, non-contention, and practices like wu-wei and meditation to quiet the mind and align with the Tao. And even Plato, while emphasizing reason, saw moral virtue as crucial for ordering the soul and preparing it for contemplating the forms.
So these practices aren't just side issues, they're often seen as necessary groundwork for the deeper knowledge or wisdom.
Absolutely. They calm the static, sharpen the focus, and make the mind a suitable instrument for realizing the true, however that truth is conceived.
And the kind of knowledge sought is clearly different, isn't it? It's not just book learning. It's transformative.
Definitely. It's a knowledge that changes who you are and how you perceive everything. Now, the source also brings up an interesting distinction regarding the goal of liberation. Is it escape transcendence or realization integration?
Right. What's the difference there?
Well, traditions like Gnosticism, with its view of a flawed material world, tend to frame liberation as an escape from this lower realm to the higher pleroma. You're getting out.
And Plato, too, in a sense. Ascending from the cave, sensory world to the realm of forms?
You could argue that yes. There's a definite sense of transcending the limitations of the physical sensory world towards something higher and purely intelligible.
Okay, so who represents the realization integration side?
Traditions like Advaita Vedanta, Madhyamaka, Yogacara, and Taoism often seem to lean more this way.
How so?
In Advaita, liberation, Buddha, is realizing you are Brahman right here, right now. It's removing ignorance, not necessarily going somewhere else. In Madhyamaka, realizing emptiness means seeing the true nature of Sasara itself, understanding that Nirvad isn't separate.
Right, Sasara is nirvavat when perceived correctly.
Yogacara aims to transform consciousness,
Ah.
to see reality without the dualistic projections, integrating experience in a new way. And Taoism is about living in the world, but in harmony with the Tao, integrating oneself with a natural flow.
So it's less about leaving the world behind and more about changing your fundamental understanding and relationship to it.
That seems to be a key emphasis in these paths. But regardless of whether the goal is framed as escape or integration, the process always involves a fundamental shift in perception. Alan Watts had that great quote.
Oh, yeah.
Something about enlightenment not being about levitating 2 inches off the ground, but about a radical change in your perspective, your feeling of identity.
From feeling like a separate ego in a bag of skin.
To realizing you're interconnected with, or even identical to, the whole show. It's a reevaluation of everything.
So the illusion is pierced, and reality, whatever that means in the specific tradition, is seen differently. Okay, now for a final contrast. How do all these perspectives stack up against modern Western scientific materialism?
The dominant paradigm for many today. The contrast is pretty stark on several fronts. First, the fundamental view of reality.
Spiritual philosophical traditions often posit something beyond the physical, with consciousness maybe primary.
Right, whereas materialism basically says the physical universe, matter and energy governed by physical laws is all there is. Consciousness is seen as secondary, an emergent property of complex matter, like brain activity.
It's a complete inversion, really. Matter primary versus consciousness primary, or at least co-fundamental.
Exactly, and this leads to very different views on illusion and perception.
How so?
In the traditions we've discussed, illusion has heavy metaphysical or epistemological weight. It's about misapprehending ultimate reality. Perception is often seen as subjective, potentially deeply flawed or constructive. Materialism tends to treat illusion more psychologically or physiologically. It's an error in sensory processing or cognitive interpretation of an objective external world that's assumed to be basically out there as we perceive it, barring minor errors.
So illusion is a glitch in the brain's representation of the real physical world.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
The goal of perception, in that view, is accurate representation of that external physical reality.
And the path to truth or understanding, also completely different.
Night and day. Spiritual traditions emphasize introspection, meditation, contemplation, wisdom, sometimes mystical experience.
Internal paths, largely.
While materialism relies almost exclusively on the scientific method, empirical observation, hypothesis testing, experimentation on the external physical world.
An external objective path.
And even the idea of objective reality differs. For materialism, it's the mind-independent physical world. For many of these other traditions, ultimate reality might be non-dual, transcending the subject-object split we take for granted.
And the way of knowing reflects that observation versus participation or identification.
Precisely. It's a fundamentally different orientation towards reality, knowledge, and the nature of the self.
Wow. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways? It's been a whirlwind tour through some incredibly deep ideas.
It really has. I think the first takeaway is just the sheer diversity of ways humans have conceptualized this feeling that things aren't quite what they seem. Illusion means very different things across these traditions.
From superimposed reality to mistaken belief to mental projection to flawed creation.
Exactly. But the second takeaway is the common thread. Despite the differences, they all suggest that our ordinary state involves some fundamental misperception, rooted in some form of ignorance.
And that enlightenment or awakening or liberation involves seeing through this ignorance and illusion.
Yes, leading to a profound, transformative shift in perception and one's relationship to reality.
And the implications for how we live also vary: escape, transcendence, integration, transformed engagement.
And it's interesting to bring in modern interpreters like Alan Watts, who you mentioned earlier, he did a great job linking Māyā not just to metaphysics, but to our everyday social conventions, the roles we play, the illusion of the separate ego being so central.
Seeing Eastern liberation as akin to psychotherapy, in a way changing consciousness.
Right, bringing it down to earth. So maybe a final synthesis is this. The enduring human quest to understand reality finds incredibly diverse expressions. These traditions offer powerful critiques of ordinary perception, identify ignorance as the linchpin holding illusion in place, and propose paths towards a liberating knowledge or awakening. This awakening fundamentally transforms our relationship to ourselves and the world, dissolving suffering by revealing reality's true nature.
And perhaps, as you suggested, the illusion isn't the world out there, but maybe our own mind's limited, fragmented way of seeing it. Liberation being about waking up within the world, but with new eyes.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yeah. Awakening to the world as it truly is, beyond our projections and concepts.
That is a truly profound thought to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this. It's been incredibly rich and thought-provoking.
My pleasure. It's fascinating territory.
Exploring these diverse perspectives on illusion really does offer invaluable insights, doesn't it? Into those enduring questions about the human condition, the nature of reality. We really encourage you, our listener, to maybe sit with these ideas, reflect on which concepts might resonate most with your own experience, your own understanding. And here's maybe one final provocative thought for you to mull over. Could our everyday perception, the reality we just take for granted, be just one way, among potentially many, of interpreting a deeper, more fundamental reality? What if the limitations we perceive aren't actually inherent in the world itself, but rather embedded in the very framework, very lens through which we try to understand it?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. We invite you to delve deeper into the sources we touched on today. Continue your own personal deep dive into these truly fascinating philosophical traditions. Thanks for joining us.